sign in?
No.
Oh, here. Okay.
Oh, I parked at the very bottom. That's it. Here we are still.
I've been trying to cook. There's Kevin is film as well. I didn't want to cook it downstairs this weekend. Yes. I've sent it several times, but I'll send it again.
Okay.
Well, okay. But if we could announce it in the flyer. This is the flyer.
Okay.
Because it's very, and the directors will be there. And I'm gonna host a panel on art forgiveness.
Oh, you're very interested.
Yeah, that's it.
You're-
Yeah. And do you want to talk to the mayor? We did the come to the couple and she'd be very interested, the director there for art. I come from an arts background, so it's very.
afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to see you today, and I'm very happy to welcome you here today. My name is Professor Ben Hopkins. I'm the director of the Sigur Center for Asian Studies, which is co-sponsoring today's talk along with the GW Institute for Korean Studies. Together, we are hosting and presenting Professor Woondo Choi, who is a research fellow at the Institute of Korean and Japanese Relations at the Northeast Asian History Foundation in Seoul, Korea. He's been spending the calendar year of 2018 at the Sigur Center as a visiting fellow. We've been very pleased to have him here, and it's going to be on some of his researches that he's been working on over the past year he'll be presenting. Professor Choi originally got his PhD from the University of Colorado in Boulder in 1997, and since then has been a visiting professor at Nagasaki University in Japan, as well as here at the Sigur Center. He's widely published on Japanese foreign policy, U.S.-Japan security relations, territorial disputes, and historical reconciliation, with over 50 articles in book chapters. So without any further ado, Mr. Choi.
Thank you very much. Well, first, let me express my appreciation to the Sigur Center and Professor Benjamin for giving me this chance to make a presentation. Well, there's today, it could be my bad luck, maybe, because the Sigur Center started recording my presentation for this is the first time of the Institute, so, well, I'm kind of nervous, but I try my best. Well, well, this topic could be maybe some of it very interesting, but some of it, it's a kind of too broad. I'm trained in political science discipline, but because I'm working at the History Foundation, somehow I began to think about the history of the U.S. occupation of Japan. The reason why I started this study is that in Korea, we need to explain U.S.-Japan relationship, but many people, because we Koreans are interested with Japanese foreign policy, are interested with that, concerned with that. They do not deal with directly about what really happened during the occupation and before and after the war. And then all the other research papers are focusing on small topics, such as comfort of women, or Korean citizenship in Japan, or some cultural heritage and stuff. But many people guess what's going on between the United States and Japan, but they do not have a specific research results. So that's why I wanted to look into more the root of the U.S.-Japan relationship through the occupation period. But as many of you will know, it lasted for about 45 to 53, 8 years. But it has if you look into the documents, it has a lot of government documents. So when you started, it seems to be very, you're excited, it seems to be interesting, but once you dig into the hip of the documents, you can be intimidated. And then the worst thing is that after studying, looking into the occupation period, we had to expand our perspective. We began from before the end of the war, with the preparing for the war settlement. And then, if you go to the final part of the occupation, it moves to the peace treaty phase. So, well, so far I had to deal with the long period, the pre-war, preparing for the post-war settlement, and the occupation period, and the final phase of peace treaty. But in this research, I did not find out concrete final result of my research yet, because it's in progress. So today I will focus on those three phases and then what would be the Koreans' perspective about those things. So far, almost all the research results on this broad topic is done by the US scholars or Japanese. So I think we'd better take a look at how the Koreans would look at the whole process. Well, there are lots of participants in that post-war settlement process, but let me usually focus on the documents in the State Department. So usually when we talk about that, the major concrete document that starts from the ones made in State Department, and use this one. Okay. Because we have 25 to 30 minutes. This, my English, I have to try to move quickly. Well, at the beginning of the discussion in the research group in the State Department, well, right after the Germany started the war, the people in the State Department and many expertise, they wanted to make a post-war settlement preparation right at the beginning of the Second World War because of their experience in the First World War. So they tried to make a special study groups, but it took 2 or 3 years until the Japanese make a Pearl Harbor attack. So after the December 1941, their idea began to be concrete, realized into a organization process. And then, well, the first one I'm showing is that it was 1943. So after entering into 1942, the President Roosevelt and the Secretary of State Cordell Hull and all the people in the State Department, they were just discussing about how to establish the study groups for that. And then the political study group studied in the middle of the end of the 1942, and then this was maybe the first draft T-357 was dated as July 28, 1943. At the time, people thought that the Far East, there was a Far Eastern study group in that, political studies. The group was led by the professor at the Clarkson University, whose name was Blakesley, and then he recruited the professor at Columbia University, the Hugh Borton, and then they made a small study groups, and then when they started discussions, they had to get involved with the people in the New York-based the Council of Foreign Affairs, and then they started to discuss with the concrete paper about what should we do with Japan after the war. So this should be the first draft in the post-war policy planning. In that ones, you can see this one. Well, the director Blakesley just prepared 1.5 pages draft to discuss about how post-war planning. Now, I was surprised. If I make a presentation, I should be prepared with 25 pages PowerPoint. But at their discussion groups, he started with the 2 pages preparations. So this is something called, Blakesley was at the time, Blakesley was the first person who opened the class of international relations in the United States. At the time, we had this other China studies, Japan studies, but there was no discipline called international relations. So that's why he was the expert in dealing with the broader perspective in international affairs. And he made a presentation about this, and then let me show you briefly what happened here. So these are my summaries of what's written in these images. There are only 4 points. In military terms, to prevent the menace, the titles of the 4 are the things anyone can agree. Maybe the minimum policy towards Japan. And then after that, they said questions, and then he explains what we have to do with these topics. So in the case of military terms, questions on the desirability of controlling heavy industries and establishing permanent international military inspections. It means that, should we do that? If we move to the second topic, economics and financial terms, he raised questions on the amount of reparations, confiscations of investments in foreign countries. So how far should he go? And the third is same, in the political terms, how much the United States get involved with the revision of the state, the government forms and the Constitution. So the reason why the non-punitive approach from the beginning was that Blakesley had a kind of a international relations orientation, and then he is deeply involved with the First World War post-war settlement. And then, if you look at the whole process, many people were concerned with the resurgence of Germany because of the punitive settlement at the First World War. So, the Blakesley, after the whole process, these days, if we place the people involved in that whole process on the spectrum, he was the most liberal side. So the first proposal was most non-punitive and friendly ones, and then when he raised questions like that, it means he was pursuing the minimum involvement of the United States after the war. So he wanted to leave the Japanese government as it is, even the Institute of Emperor as it is. So, of course, the military industry should be removed, but the other economic bases should be sustained. So, at the first meeting, there was that paper was seriously and severely criticized for being too soft. And these are the two people. On the left-hand side is Professor Blakesley, and on the right-hand side, Hugh Borton, who was a professor at Columbia University. Well, so the next one was that during the war from 1942 and 45, there are lots of changes in the organizational structure, even only in the State Department. So PwC is a post-war committee. It is the PwC was established early 1940 and late 1943, and then all the papers published after that was named the PwC. PwC 108 was just a revision of accepting the questions, but 108B was different. It means that after 1 year, the Blakesley's paper was criticized and it was revised, but not much different. And it was revised again, and then it was the code named as PwC 10B. It had a different structure. In that paper, it is added that the occupation should be 3 periods. And then this will be continued. This shows that how the post-war settlement develops another 2 years until the end of the war. then in the PwC 108 became more punitive. And then it went to 1945, June 11th. There's SWNCC, this is called SWINK 150. It is a Far Eastern group in the State Department, and it's the question of the War Department. As the war going to the end part of the end, the War Department and Navy's department wanted to, the concrete policy, what have to do with Japan when the war is over. And then they asked the State Department, do we have anything prepared? And then, well, as we said before, since 1942 and 43, those small group of Far Eastern groups were preparing those papers. And then those papers were handed over to the War Department. And then at the end of the war, this SWINK means that State War Navy Coordination Committee. So, well, before 1945, Army, Navies, State Department, Roosevelt, President, they just pursue their own policies. And then when the war approaches to the end, they realize that we need to coordinate and make it one concrete policy. And that's why the Coordination Committee was established in 1944. And then the SWINK, well, I'll show you. Well, this is the building where the SWINK was established. Last year in December, when I came over here, and then this is just our neighbor. And there, on the plate, it is written that this building was used for the SWINK. It was very impressive to me. You know, this is the place where those papers were made. And then, well, after that, as the war goes to the end, well, there were several other actors like Ambassador Grew and Stimson. They wanted to be less punitive, but still, at the end of the war, the resistance by the Japanese was getting serious, and then U.S. casualties were increasing, and public opinion getting worse, and the armies and navies are they are the real victims. So their hatred toward Japan was soaring, and then the post-war settlement getting more punitive and punitive. And then, see, look at the SWINK 150A, it was August 18, 1945, almost the end of the war. It began to include the concept of the indirect administration, but no mention on the Institute of the Emperor. So, well, this is not dealing with the specific topics of the Emperor institution or the government, but the whole picture of that. So, this is a PwC 152, 1944. This is to show you that Hugh Borton, who was just working with Mr. Professor Blakesley, was preparing. He was his religion was Quaker, so he spent 3 years as a. Somewhere I have to explain that. He Friends Road School. He was teaching there, and he get involved with the Japanese studies. And then he finishes his degree in Columbia University. So, well, when 1943, the Far Eastern Group was made, it was very small. There was even Blakesley was not Japan specialist. There were 6 members in that group. And then Blakesley was not Japan specialist. There were only 3 persons who can speak Japanese and read papers. So the Hugh Morton made this one, and then even though he was he cooperated with Blakesley, his position was a little bit different with Blakesley. Even though he is just the second next to Blakesley's non-punitive approaches. But look at this, his proposal that says he believed that Japan went to war because of the military who used the constitution to move emperors. And then he said that we have to remove those militarism, and then we should remove the clauses in the constitution, and the government should be changed. And then Japanese people will develop their own democracies there. So, even though Gracely wanted to leave their institutions as it is, Hugh Borton believed that they have to change the institutions there to minimize involvement with the Japanese society. So, and then if you go to the swing, this paper talks about how to change the Japanese institutions. And then in 1945, October 8th, it is developed into Swing 228, reform of the Japanese government systems used as a guideline for GHQ for General MacArthur in the drafting of Japan's new constitution. Okay, and then now move to the well, the occupation phase. And then those Swing 144, the last paper I showed you here, is sent to the Joint Chief of Staffs, which was made in 1942, maybe dealing with Germany in discussion with the Churchill. The War Department had cooperated with the England. England had the Joint Chief of Staff, but the United States didn't have it. So they created a counterpart. Anyway, the Joint Chief of Staff develops the papers. When the Swing 144 was finished in September 24, it was just 13 pages. The 2 pages which we saw at the beginning is revised, and developed into 13 pages. And then went to the Joint Chief of Staff, it develops into the 33 pages document. Okay, if you look at the changes in styles, the Swing 154 says what we should do, this policy direction, non-specific organizations, but JSCS, the paper was like a letter sending to General MacArthur. This direction is for you to something, something, something. And then in executing this directions, you should do something. So, this is the paper later that General MacArthur says, one of best document made in the government. So, and then, well, when he arrived October 30th, and then Atsugi Airport in Tokyo from the Philippines, he said he didn't get any directions. I have to find out the solutions from the beginning. But later it is found that already he received the telegram when he was in the Philippines. He knew what he had to do. And then Sig 144 shows the ultimate objective of no more means menace of Japan, usually what you can guess, military occupation, political and economic sections. Okay. So JCS 1380-15, which was finally sent to the General MacArthur. Look at the date. It's November 3rd. It's 3 months after the General MacArthur started the occupation. It says that this directive defines the authority which will possess policies. And then this, in that process, because it was made by the War Department, it became more punitive compared to the Blacksleys and the Hugh Bortons. And then, well, as you know, the GHQ just had democratized with the new constitution, and then he purged huge previous, soldiers and policy decision makers, and then getting into the 1947 and 1948, something we call the reverse course began. Well, the reason why is that after the war, while dealing with the Allied powers and the Soviet Union, the United States began to realize that, the Soviet Union cannot be the real allies. It could be a real threat to us. And then the George Kennan now, sends a long telegram to the State Department. He comes to as a policy planning advisor, and then this is the whole process. And then from the 1947, the people in Washington, D.C. began to criticize General MacArthur. And then, well, his advisors, his assistants, who worked together in the Philippines and Bataan, they are called the Bataan Boys. They were called as a New Dealers. They had a very ideal goals to improve they thought that democratize the Japanese society. And then that began to get criticism from the Washington, D.C. and State Department. Well, and then entering into 1948, all the commissions, because the strike commissions and the George Kennan and Draper Johnston's, all the commissions visit Tokyo and see what's going on, how to change the policies. And then after the Kennan visited Tokyo, the NSC 13-2 is which is official document after the Kennan's visit. They said at the time, General MacArthur, from 1947, he wanted to make a peace treaty as soon as possible. But in 1948, when Kennan visited Tokyo, in this paper he said that this is not the time move for the peace treaty. This is time to control the Allied powers, because the Soviet Union may get involved. And then the United States cannot decide as it wants. So peace treaty should be postponed later, and the ground should be done to prepare for the peace treaty. And then also in the second point, you can see that in the United States, they had trouble between the State Department and Army and Navies. The Army and Navies, who are the real participants in the war behavior, they wanted a security confirmation, how to hold bases in Japan and how to continue its security arrangements for the futures. So the peace treaty and the security question collided with each other, and then they could not find solutions. But the ironic is that the real answer and the solution came from the General MacArthur. He suggested them to make two separate treaties, peace treaty and the alliance treaty separately. Well, so far, briefly, we dealt with about 10 years. And then these are the rough images, what you can see. In the whole process, we can find is the dominance of the memories and lessons of history, and lack of consistency in security strategy despite the changes in environment, politics among the actors, importance of individual actors. I'll explain these things detailed here. See, this is a picture at Cairo. And there is Chiang Kai-shek here. Then, well, before I start this one, I didn't look into detail, but I was surprised why Chiang Kai-shek should be there. After 1945, the China, and especially Chiang Kai-shek's government, was very shaky. It was corrupted. It was very weak. And then, but still he was participated at one of the threes. Well, Roosevelt had been thinking about the post-war structure as led by the four strong powers, including with Stalin. But at this time, Stalin is not involved, didn't came over here, but we don't need to go over all the details, but he just thought that we need some country in East Asia who can resist a fight with Japan and deal with Japan even after the war. So Roosevelt believed that China should be the country deals with East Asia after the war. The reason why is that he says that why China, he says Owen Lattimore, his letter, he was, at the time, he was the political advisor of Chiang Kai-shek. And then he sent a letter to Roosevelt that China should be the most important actors in the post-war arrangements, and then we should depend on China in East Asia and all those letters. And then the Roosevelt's leadership style is that, even Hugh Borton said it in memoir, that the president never heard about the specialist voices in the State Department. He was depending on his advisors and close assistants. So with his own decisions, Chiang Kai-shek began to participate one of the four world leaderships. Well, the other one is that Roosevelt, who involved with the war settlement of the First World War at Paris, he remembers what happened before. And then if you look at the other things, the George Kennan's containment policy came up. And then, well, to me, of course it can be a change of the Soviet Union, but how come such a world strategy can be changed? And the United States didn't recognize the directions of the Soviet Union. So if you look at the whole process, it's strange, they didn't know that. And then those ambassadors' telegrams and information, sometimes they are ignored, sometimes they are believed too much. And then the US policy security directions changed. The second one is the personality, impressions, and images. He never consulted with the diplomats and State Department, preferred personal advisors. And then, even though he assigned Cordell Hull as a Secretary of State, and he stayed as a Secretary of State for 11 years, but he never believed him. He never consulted him for those important conferences. So, well, when we think about the famous rational choice, it is not rational at all. And then if you look at the General MacArthur, if you look at his way of dealing with Japan, it seems that his impressions, based upon his experience in East Asia, was reflected a lot. And then, well, while Eisenhower was in the Atlantic side, he was in the Pacific side, and he was a very much Pacific-centered approaches. And then, well, there's something interesting is that he joined, along with his father, who was the general at the Philippines, he joined the Russo-Japanese War, and then as one of the observant. And then, if you read his memoirs, he says that he was impressed with the Japanese soldiers, the famous soldiers, Nogi and Togo, and they are very strong personalities. Their leadership is wonderful. But if you read the other side, they generally says that even the General MacArthur says that because Japanese, even the Japanese Army and Navies are following the feudal systems, their leadership is not based on merits. They're just inherited with their parents, and then the leaderships are not that efficient. They have good soldiers and poor leaderships. So, these individual, the personal experiences affected a lot to their decision makings. Well, if you look at the Hugh Borton, he had experience and had a very strong religious background, and well, he seems to be a good boy. He's a very kind and friendly, and then he was in that group. I said that there was only 6. The 3 can speak Japanese. The one, Borton was dealing with Japan and Korea. The Fury was dealing with the economy. The Fury was 21-year-old. He was just he spent 1 year in Japan as an assistant to the embassy, and then he came back. But his paper was wonderful, and then his superior said that this is one of the papers in the State Department. And then, well, the Hugh Borton, he spent almost all the time in the 3 years in Japan, but on his way for vacation, he went through Korea Peninsula. And then he left just one sentence. The poor country Korea did not have that many administrative experiences and something. And then, anyway, he was the only one who knew about South Korea and the Korean Peninsula, and then he was dealing with that. The 4th one is William Siebold on peace treaties. Well, he was the political advisor to General MacArthur, but we need to compare these 2 people. The far left-hand side is the George Atchison. He was the political advisor to General MacArthur from 1945 to 1947. He was the China hand. And then because he was the person in the State Department, when he was sent to Tokyo, General MacArthur said that State Department sent him to Tokyo to, how can I say, look over General MacArthur. And then General MacArthur thought that because he was from China, he accepted him. But he called him a joke as I think you are pink. Because he was working with the communist orientations, and you're not that much, so you're pink. But he had a very good relationship with him. But 1947, because of their airplane accident, he died. And then William Siebold, who was working as an assistant to General Atchison, he was promoted to his positions. Well, his wife was the 2nd generation of Japanese. His wife's father was English. And then, well, he was a Navy person, also background of the lawyer, and then he worked as a ambassador level, political assistant there. But the thing which is sore to us is that, to Koreans, is that he sent a telegram in 1949 that saying, already the State Department had the 5 peace treaty drafts, they revised 5 times. At the time, he sent a telegram to State Department and said that, according to my research, Japan has a strong basis of claims for Liancourt rocks, the dokdo, what you call, Koreans call dokdo. And then, in the previous drafts, it was decided that it was written as Japan should not resign its claims over Liankoro rocks and wood rocks, and wood rocks. But after that, when in the 1950s, when the last began its treaty war from the sixth draft, the sentences changed, and they just specified Japan should not accept like big 3 islands in Korea. Japan should not claim those 3 islands, and then there was nothing. So previously, Liankoro rocks specified as an island Japan should give up, but from that it was dropped. So that's why even these days the two countries having a serious conflict over the small island. And then, well, so we Koreans would think that if Atchison did not die from the accident, there was no letter from the Seabold to the State Department. Okay, the third one is that to us, how the United States guaranteed its safety after the war. The occupation was okay, and then if you look at the documents, how to demobilize and how to disarm Japan. But after that, there was, if we think about all the changing security strategies, how the United States have been dealing with the future. And then 1953, when they had the security treaty with Japan, well, it was changed in 5 years. And then even these days, many Koreans think they know that Japan cannot move as it wants because of the constitutions and some arrangements, but we do not have even for me, who's studied about U.S.-Japan relationship, I did not read that many papers specifically what was the device of the United States, what was the arrangement for the future. Okay, so from this part, it is what would be the implications for the present U.S.-Japan relationships and Korean politics. The first one is like Armitage and Nye report said that Japan should be the England in the Atlantic Oceans. And then, well, remember 1980s, Japan's economy was #1 in the world. And then, as far as I remember, at the time I was studying in Colorado, and in O.J. Simpson's court, there was a TV monitor every morning, written as a Sony there. And then Japan's economy was really rising, and then many Koreans and many people said that what's going to happen in the future. And then, well, somehow there was a Plaza Accord, and Japan began its long-term depressions, and then already it entered into the age of the society. But anyway, what we are thinking is that what was the long-term policy of the United States in dealing with Japan? The second one is that, well, we Koreans sometimes think that, well, what is United States between Korea and Japan? Sometimes you would remember that GSOMIA, which is the military information sharing arrangements between the two countries. 2 years ago, because of the question about conflict women issues, Korea didn't want to conclude this GSOMIA agreement. But after that, it is agreed, but still, for those security cooperations between Japan and Korea, we still have a lot of lack of confidence, at least the Korean side. If we move to the third ones then, well, 3 years ago, Japan, the Abe government made security legislations which expands its self-defense, a collective self-defense concept. And then Japan became to be able to mobilize its self-defense forces out of its territory in need of the cooperation of alliance. It means that if the United States want, Japan can mobilize its forces out of its territory. And that time, well, because of the nuclear crisis in Korean Peninsula, many people wondering that the United States would sometimes have a drill to evacuate its civilians out of the Korean Peninsula. And Japan also said that sometimes Japan may evacuate Japanese civilians out of the Korean Peninsula. Then, because of that security legislations, many people who in Korea began to afraid that are those Japanese soldiers come to Korean Peninsula again? So no, we should not allow it. That's a big issue in Korea. So the persons who read some books, we know that how the other clauses, they are, in the legislation it is written that Japan's government is supposed to consult with the object countries before they mobilize. But still many people says that if the United States request to Japan, what Japan is going to do? So that's why many Koreans think that what's the United States strategic calculation on that situations between the United Korea and Japan. Well, so far this was the kind of a piece of the Korean perspective about the occupation, post-war settlement. Well, this is my chance to ask you questions and get your opinions. Well, once I read TV, the Luis Giampieri, who is in the movie of Broken, he went to Tokyo again to carry the torch for the Tokyo Olympics. No, not Tokyo Olympics. It was later Nagano Winter Olympics. At the time, the prison guard Watanabe, who disappeared and found a living successful life, he refused to meet him. And even on the interviews, he did not apologize, did not make any apologies, and then he remained unrepentant about his action during the World War until his death of 2003. And then while looking at the documentary, I was wondering what the Giampieri and United States people would think about that. He suffered so much. I've been thinking, is that the winner's leniency? Is that really the Christian's creed or something? The second one is that this is my real question. It was just a month ago. There was a international fleet review at Jeju Island. At the time, there were 15 countries were participating. At the time, usually I heard that on the ship, the countries are supposed to have their country flag and then their navy flag. And then Japanese, the Maritime Self-Defense Force said that we're going to bring our own flag. It was do you remember that very, the sun, and then the sun shines red, very, well, some in some sense, it seems to be very strong. In some sense, there was a wonderful, impressive design. But it is a symbol of Japanese imperialism for Koreans. But the thing I'm wondering is that after the war, Japanese Imperial Navy was dismissed. And then after the Korean War, and then security treaties, Japan made self-defense force, not the Navy. Maritime self-defense forces inherited the same flag as it is. Logically, it seems to doesn't make sense to me. So the other one is what the Americans have their images and think about the maritime self-defense forces using the flag even these days. Let me stop here. It took longer, much longer than I expected. Sorry about that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Professor Choi. I see that our clock remains at 1 o'clock. As that's been broken forever, don't worry, everybody, it's 1:30. So we have about 15 minutes for questions. I can open it to the floor, and my only request is you please identify yourself before asking your question. Why don't I break the ice by using my position of the chair. Now, you somewhat provocatively entitled your talk, the U.S.-Japan post-war settlement and relationship, a Korean perspective. And I wonder, as a historian, what unique elements and new elements are revealed about this post-war settlement by looking at it through a Korean perspective? What is the addition that's brought to the table, as it were, that looking at this through the prism of a Korean perspective reveals that hasn't been seen either looking at it from a Japanese or conversely an American perspective?
Well, do you mean the new academic contribution?
Yeah, I mean, you talked about how you're looking at this relationship between the U.S. and Japan from the Korean perspective. So, what new is brought to the table by looking at it from the Korean perspective?
Okay. Well, while doing my research, I was struggling to find a small and narrow argument, which we are supposed to do. But until I prepared for this presentation, I could not find what should I do, because there was such a big topic. Usually I advise to the graduate students, narrow down your focus, take small topics. That's the way you finish your degree as soon as possible. But I could not do that. But from this presentation, I found that the next stage would better, I want to take a look at the detailed document to deal with the demilitarization of the Japan. So far I didn't, there are some pieces of it, like United States demobilized the aviation industry after the war, and then Japan was late in participating in developing jet fighter technologies. And then yesterday on the Yomiuri Shimbun reported that Japan gave up to its own made fourth generation jet fighter because it was too behind. Well, there was a piece of the information, but I want to take a look at the more concrete policy directions on what was the U.S. policy to deal with demilitarization and what was their long-term perspective.
Anyone else? My name is Mindy Cutler. I'm director of a little think tank called Asia Policy Point, and I actually do a lot of work with people who were POWs of Japan. I know many of them. I've talked to many of them. I never talked with Mr. Zamperini, but there is a new movie out about Mr. Zamperini, the second movie, which talks about, it was his Christian conversion, on how he was able to forgive Watanabe. And with my conversations with other POWs, they never fully forgive, but they understand they can't live their life with hate. If they didn't commit suicide in some way within the first 6 years, which was the highest death rate of all World War II veterans, they had to figure out how to live with this trauma and anger. And to be quite frank, the people who were put as guards and officers in the POW camps were essentially, like SS officers, they were sociopaths, without question. And it's amazing that some of them were able to go back into civilization and live a successful life. In fact, some of them even emigrated to the U.S. Usually in a regular society, they would have been in jail. And so my question, there is a question in this, because I've worked with so many POWs, and one of the hallmarks of Japanese occupation were the astounding number of atrocities, particularly against civilians and against the war crimes trials, which a lot of them didn't become apparent until the occupation. So I was wondering if you thought about that, on how that may have changed the view toward the peace treaty, maybe making it harder, tougher, because when it became clear how cruel the Japanese had been, it was massacre after massacre, what they had done to Manila, and MacArthur was like, they leveled Manila. Did that factor in, hardening the position from soft and forgiving to the Japanese to more punitive in creating the peace treaty? And with the POWs, MacArthur wanted them out of Japan as quickly as possible, and many of them were made to sign gag orders, which they couldn't talk about the experience because they didn't want people to know how bad it was, because they felt they wouldn't be able to pacify Japan if people knew how bad it was. And Zamperini's experience was absolutely typical. That POWs who watched the movie would say, "Where's the bugs? Where's the smell? Why are they just singling him out? Everyone was beaten."
General MacArthur said that in his memoirs, there was testimonies from the POWs,
Right.
that he wanted to publish in the newspapers, and the U.S. government stopped it
Right.
because of the public opinion. It was worse because the United States had to deal with the communism in Japan and with the Soviet Union. But well, in that sense, if you look at the George Kennan's containment policy and peace treaties, it seems to be that the decision makers thinking about the real national interest of the whole United States. But as we can see in the other points, many of them are not that much rational. But still, even in that non-punitive peace treaties, if you think about the causes of the post-war settlement, the United States had to deal with the possible menace of Japan in the future. So that's why I'm saying that what kind of arrangements was prepared for that.
What was the position of Korea right after the war? I mean, as the U.S. occupies Japan and stuff, Korea being an ex-colony, but what is its legal position, as it were?
Oh, there was some sentence here. Well, as I said about the Liang-Coral rocks, Dokdo, until the 5th draft, Korea was one of the signatories. But from the 6th, it is dropped. the Japan and England opposed it, because their argument is that Korea is not the Allied powers. Korea is the power, is the country who fought against the Allied powers as a colony of Japan. So that's why we have to deal with the separate reparation agreement, which lasted until 1965. So Korean voice was totally dropped out of the history. So, well, in 1948, Korean government was established under the UN. What's that? How can I say? Under the UN. So it was legally established, but to deal with the colonial experience, it was a totally different, what can I say, the country for the foreigners. So that was the problem in the international society. Well, right after the war, the Korean independence forces, they made a temporary government in China. And then they wanted to come back right after the war. And then, because they believed that they are the representative of the decolonized Korea, they should be official return, but because the government, United States government, allowed them as individual returns. So it was not officially accepted in the international community as a country, the ones we had before 1948. Well, another thing amazing is that whenever the post-war settlement, how come the Korea appears many times? More often than I expected. And then it was a very important topic, even at the Cairo and then the succeeding conferences. But suddenly, it just disappeared, Korea, in the history process. So, well, maybe we need to study more. Why? Some people say that Chiang Kai-shek urged Roosevelt to make independence of Korea, but later historians found that Chiang Kai-shek never talked about that. And that it was the Roosevelt, somehow maybe the advisor of the Latimore, who was working in China. He contacted with Korean independence leaderships at the time, and then he might have talked to the Roosevelt to make Korea independent.
Deepa Lovely from Sigur Center. When you're given the history of the Japan-Korea colonization and immediately following the World War II and the setting up of the alliance structure with the United States, how easy or difficult was it to get the former colonizer and the colony and the United States in a kind of a mutual security alliance? Was it very difficult? I mean, what was the Korean perspective on that? Was it imposed, or was it something
No,
that...
Korea and Japan is not allied country now.
Yeah.
Yeah, but just
But they have a...
yeah. So Victor Cha posed as a what's that in English? Pseudo alliance.
Pseudo alliance?
Yeah, through the United States. No. That at some point, United States wanted kind of a NATO style kind of alliance structure in East Asia, but I don't know detailed things about that. But in anyway, about the security cooperation with Japan, the Seungman Lee, the first Korean president, who worked worked for independence of Korea, hated Japan so much, so he didn't accept it to cooperate with Japan. So when we say that the Korean region, East Asian regional cooperation these days is difficult because of the U.S. hub and spoke policies.
Right, exactly.
Then some scholars says that we proposed the NATO type alliance, the structure, but someone really rejected it.
Great, well, we've come to time, so if you'll please help me in thanking our speaker for this afternoon. I thank you for your time for coming this afternoon, and look forward to seeing you at other Sigur events. Mindy has a.
Oh, this weekend, starting on Friday evening